Thank you for joining us today for our seminar in the Journey to Science series at Onondaga Community College. This series is sponsored by the Bridges to Baccalaureate grant, and today we're welcoming two speakers. We are welcoming Arvind, Natarzan, and Trevor Franklin. Arvind, originally from Chennai in India, completed his PhD in microbiology at Cornell, and he is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford, working on, amongst other things, COVID poop. When not working in the lab, Arvind enjoys riding his motorcycle and taking his dog Yoda to the park. Trevor is a PhD candidate in chemical and biomolecular engineering, currently at Cornell University, where he also researches bacteria. Trevor started graduate school after exploring some other professional areas. He used to work at a toy company and as a college counselor. And when he is not working in the lab at Cornell, he enjoys woodworking and taking care of his 50,000 pets, their bees. As you're watching, if you have any questions at any time, there's a question and answer button at the top, and you can submit your questions at any point in time, and we will be sure to cover them. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your stories with us. Let's welcome Arvind and Trevor. And since there's two of them, I will ask a question, and then they're going to take turns answering. So we'll start with some basics. Arvind, can you share a little bit about your background? What made you become interested in science, and what did that path look like?
Thanks so much for the generous introduction and for having me today, Lisi. I want to say that I have a special connection with Onondaga because you're a community college that features in my thesis. So the final part of my thesis actually features work with students from Onondaga Community College, and I'm grateful to be able to come back virtually to have a conversation with students here. So to your question, why did I choose a path in science and what was that trajectory like? So I grew up in India, and typical of stereotypes of South Asian parents, I had very strict parents who wanted me to be a nerd. And so the best outdoor hobby I had was I played a beagle in the band, which, as you can tell, is not a particularly glamorous hobby. But that was me. I was a nerd. The sport I learned to play was chess, which is also so weird to say. But all of this sort of came to a till when I was in high school, because suddenly I was not interested in science or math anymore. And I wasn't interested because I just didn't understand calculus. I just didn't understand biology. It was just alien to me because of the way, in my opinion, because of the way it was taught. And I became the troublemaker in the class, because in every lecture I would put my hand up and say, but why? Why does this work this way? And I don't understand. And I would keep pushing teachers. And as a result, I would derail the pace of the program. Teachers didn't like me. I didn't like them back. Therefore, I protested and didn't study. And the result of all of this was my high school was a grand failure. I was terrible. In fact, one of my high school teachers said, Arvind, this is as far as you're going to get, and that's the end of the road for you. And so on the flip side, what that led me to understand was, one, I was no longer eligible for an engineering program, which is what every Indian parent wanted their Indian child to do at that point, either be a doctor or an engineer. But I was too bad to be either of them. And I also realized I just had so many questions about things around me that people, for the most part, took for granted. All of my peers understood integration and differentiation and took it for granted, but I didn't, because I really wanted to understand it better. And together, that meant that I wanted to pursue a career where I was able to ask questions, where it was normal to ask questions about what people took for granted otherwise, and to work off of that. An example of how that influences what I'm doing now is, for the most part, people have always said, oh, probiotics are good, right? Have a lot of yogurt, have kombucha. Do we really know if probiotics are good? Does that really affect our gut microbiome and the bacteria in our gut? And so that connects directly with the kind of work I do today with poop, trying to understand what bacteria in poop do and how they interact with the human body. So this is sort of a glimpse about why I chose science and the career that I'm in, and a brief elucidation of the path that took me to science. I'm happy to elaborate more, but I also want to give Trevor the opportunity to talk about his journey.
All right, I'll take that as my cue. Well, my path to a career in science is still unfolding, but I can recognize plenty of the steps that got me here. I credit a lot of my interest in science to being an outdoor kid. And that was just the theme of my childhood, was spending time outside. Myself and my brothers were the type who came home, dropped our book bags, went outside and did whatever we could think of until we were essentially forced to come back inside. And I credit that a lot with my interest in science, this being out in nature and wondering how it all works. That the basis of all of that is science. It's biology, it's chemistry, it's physics, and of course math. And so that laid the foundation for what I think became a slow unfurling of my interest in chemistry. So I'm a chemical engineer now, and that's very much rooted in chemistry. I can still remember the first time I did a chemistry experiment in 5th grade. We were given these solutions of different colors to mix, and they separated. And the teacher asked us to figure out why that would happen. And I figured it out quite quickly. In my opinion, it was a little clear that some of them had grains of salt in them and some of them didn't. You could see them. But there was something about figuring that out fast. And then hearing that was chemistry, that became my thing. I was into chemistry at that point. But it wasn't really till later. I had a very transformative teacher. I had that foundation of liking this thing, chemistry. But when I actually got to study chemistry, I had the coolest teacher. She was a former tornado chaser. She wasn't afraid to cuss in the classroom. She told us like it was. And oddly, for a while, I thought I would want to be a TV meteorologist. For some reason, Al Roker was my role model. I just thought of this meteorologist who was also a TV personality. And so to hear this chemist was a former tornado chaser, I just thought that was the coolest. But that really cemented me in the direction of chemistry and got me started on that track. I ended up in chemical engineering only because, well, 2 reasons. I didn't know what it was, but somebody told me, if you do chemical engineering, you don't have to go to grad school. Here I am. And they told me it's like chemistry, but you do more stuff. You do more math and you do more problem solving. And I think I was still at that age where always more sounds better. So it was a strange leap from chemistry into chemical engineering, but I did find a pretty happy home there. And so I had a lot of time off in between my undergraduate and graduate school to touch on some other passions that I had. And now I'm back in graduate school again doing chemical engineering in a very different way from what I've done before. I used to work more on the electrochemistry side of the field, and now I work more in biomaterials, working with bacteria. So I've changed around a lot, but I'm now back on this path towards a career in science, which I hope that it continues in academia. That is a large part of my purpose of being back in graduate school, but I'm still on my way.
Trevor, we'll keep you in the hot seat here for a minute. And I love that your love of science started so early with a middle school teacher or elementary school teacher. What were some challenges that you faced along the way? Were there any points in time where you thought, well, I don't think this is going to work?
Yes, there were lots of points in time where I thought it wasn't going to work. I've had a pretty long career in science in some fashion, and so much of that has been spent in school, a little bit of time outside working. And so there are a lot of small incidences of challenges. So I'm trying to put them for myself in some sort of larger context. And what comes to mind to me is the biggest challenge has been the push and pull between my academic self and my non-academic self. I am somebody who has a lot of trouble with being defined by one interest or one pursuit. And I also think that rolls out into the time I spend. If all of the time I'm spending is on one thing, I end up feeling a little bit boxed in. And so figuring out how to balance my interest with science and engineering and teaching and being in academia, which is a space that sometimes expects you to dedicate most of, if not all of your time to it. And even if they don't expect it, generally the academic world is happy to have as much of your time as you can give. up to all of it, up to and including all of it. And so there's been a lot of challenges that are just between how to balance those things. So myself as formerly an athlete, myself as a married partner, myself as someone who needs to earn money to have a living, has all been a little of the push and pull. And so my way of tasting that early on and understanding it was through internships in college, do the working world and see how that's different from school. There was a lot about the working world outside of academia that also didn't feel like a great fit for me. I remember often feeling like I couldn't wait for it to end, to get back to school where I could balance my life with my, let's say, extracurriculars a little bit more. But that dissatisfaction was part of what led me to stopping engineering when I graduated from undergrad. And that was its own sort of challenge to decide to take this thing I had focused so much time on and say, to some degree, I'm going to leave this behind and try something else. Felt like a huge leap of faith. And I don't even know if I felt like I was being faithful in it at the time. It just felt scary, but I did it anyways. And it set me off on a new path that took me through a whole lot of enjoyment in my other job. So I worked as an admissions counselor for the university I graduated from. I worked at a startup toy company. I started my own company. I worked as a college counselor in a high school. And then I started doing research again at a university in Colorado. And that, when I did my exploring and I realized that I did want to be in academia and be a scientist as well as a teacher, it was a really big challenge to turn back and get back to where I am now. It took a number of years to get back into a research space, to convince people that I hadn't forgotten engineering and science and math in the 6 years I had taken off. I got married and I had new responsibilities associated with that. So I made a lot of choices that were challenging to balance what I felt I needed from my career and my life in all sorts of ways. And I think it lengthened a journey that on paper I could have written, if everything went ideally, would be faster. But I'll say I'm better for it, I think.
I was just going to ask a follow-up question, and that is, it doesn't sound like they were wasted years. What came out of those? Had you gone straight to graduate school, what would you have missed out on? What would be different by having had that break?
I would have missed out on, hands down, the most fun jobs I've ever had. Some of those jobs where fun is the only word I could use to describe them, or the first one, in addition to being interesting. When I was a senior in my undergrad, I had signed up for the GRE to go to grad school. I was convinced that I wanted to do some oceanography, actually, that I wanted my job to be on a boat. And the week before the GRE, I canceled it because I realized I was going to grad school without having any good reason to. And I went to a lot of networking events. We have a society called AICHE, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. And I just remember sitting next to all of these old guys, these old engineers, and they would talk to me about that year they spent driving a beer truck before they got their first job at insert engineering firm, and how it was always the best decision that they made, that there was some sort of value to taking some time to explore and figure out what you enjoy before you fall into something that will have some inertia and some momentum to it. And of all of the things that I chose not to listen to in my life from advice from adults, this was for some reason one that stuck with me. And I think that captured it a bunch, which was they weren't just haphazard choices, but they were choices that to do something that clearly was gratifying and scratched an itch. I love teaching. I love it. It's the thing that ignites my passion outside of science. And that was what my job as an admissions counselor was. I got to travel around the world to talk about engineering and what it is and how to apply to colleges in the US and how much fun engineering is. And there was a very teaching friendly side of that. So I got to explore, not haphazardly, but taste the things that I thought I would enjoy to find out, was it true or not? And then use each of those to make a smarter next choice.
Thank you for that. Arvind, what challenges have you faced? Were there any points in your path to where you currently are where you thought, well, other than math, this is the end of the road?
I would not phrase that question in the past tense. It's in the present tense. So I think at every turn in my life, including today, I've always doubted whether I'm good enough to go to the next stage. And this goes back to the first example that I said in high school, and that was actually not even a math teacher. Well, not just a math teacher, but a math, physics, chemistry. The only teacher that had faith in me in high school was my English teacher. And what I do now has nothing to do with English, but all the other teachers in high school said, well, Arvind, that's it, end of the road. And then I went to undergrad. At a small college in India, which is in some ways similar to a community college. And it's really, and the number of opportunities, as I'm sure you know, the number of opportunities you have access to is much fewer than in big engineering programs or big universities. And therefore I was struggling, and I had to proactively seek out sources to find opportunities to then find a path forward. And that was hard. It was hard because people around me didn't even understand, even though they wanted to support me, they didn't understand how to support me. And let me give you examples of these. Many of the faculty that I worked with at my undergraduate college had not written letters of recommendation for their students to pursue summer internships or to be competitive at a PhD level graduate program. They just didn't know. And so not only did I have to figure out paths forward for myself, but I also had to skill the people around me so that they could support me back to then move forward in that path, right? And so that was undergrad. And through that entire trajectory, I felt a little lost because I was trying so many different things. I was really trying to find traction in moving forward and getting into a graduate program, but it was hard. And so again, that brings about the question of, am I going to make it? And then from there, I actually did a master's program in India. That master's program was interesting because out of my undergraduate program, I did really well in undergrad, contrary to high school. And when I went to grad school, I was really confident. I was like, oh, I'm the king of this pond. I'm really good. I understand everything. But I didn't know that everybody else who was in this program was equally smart. And no, suddenly I felt dumb all over again because they were just, it was hard. It was really competitive. And so this is the first time I started drinking coffee because I had to stay up all night to study for an exam or to do research. And at that point in time, there was also a lot of misinformation. Also, it's not a good idea for your first coffee to be just black coffee. It's terrible. But that was my introduction to coffee because we had a microwave. I was in a dorm. We didn't have milk. I just made black coffee because I had to stay up. But that was grad school. And there, the misinformation that I had was, Arvind, you have to have been published in a paper, in a scientific publication, if you stand any chance of being successful in a PhD level graduate program as an applicant. And so I killed myself in my master's just working around the clock. And it was so bad that my program was structured such that for 1 year of my it was a 2-year program. For 1.5 years of my program, it was course heavy, which means our classes started at 8 a.m., went until noon when we took theoretical courses, and then from 1 p.m. to 5:30, 6, 7 p.m., we had an extended lab period. And so we would be doing experiments in that time. And this was every day. The last semester was meant to be research. So you settle on a topic that you want to explore, you do research in that topic, you learn how to do research, you learn how to generate a hypothesis, you learn how to test a hypothesis, and then summarize that in a master's thesis. However, remember I told you that I had the misinformation that I had to have a paper, and I knew I would not publish a paper with just 1 semester of work. So I had the genius idea of starting to do research in my third semester. And so what that meant is I would start my day at 8 a.m., finish my coursework at 5:30, go grab a snack, and then head to my research lab. And then I would sleep in the benches in my research lab, and then go back to my dorm at 7 a.m. to brush, shower, and then get to my class. And this was almost the entirety of my third semester, and people in my dorm often were wondering if I was in town because people who weren't going to the same classes as me didn't see me anywhere else. I don't recommend this. Don't do this. It's a terrible idea, and you don't need to do this. But nobody told me this at that time, and so I did it. But the result of that is at the end of my master's, I was so burnt out. There was nothing that could make me go to a graduate program or prepare for a GRE after that. And so, like Trevor spoke about his itch that he really needed to scratch, my itch at that point was I really wanted to row crew. So I used to row. I was an oarsman as an undergrad for a couple of years. And just as I was beginning to understand how a boat worked, I moved to a different city that didn't have a rowing program, and I just felt lost. So I went back home, stayed with my parents for a whole year, did nothing except rowing. I woke up at 8 a.m. Now it was not 8 a.m. I had to be in the gym at 6 a.m. So I was in the gym at 6 a.m., worked, rowed in the morning, rowed in the evening, and competed in programs. But that was, while it was great from just not worrying about being in a graduate program right then, this was also the opportunity for me to really put my applications together. I was able to take the GRE, I was able to write my applications. But the problem with this was it also generated a lot of fear because again, another misunderstanding in India at that time was if you have a gap year, that your application would show poorly, that it would show that you were not really interested in science, that you were okay to take a year off pursuing rowing. Who does that? And so that was the fear at that time where I was like, oh, I really need to take this break because I'm burnt out. There's no way I'm going to go into a graduate program. But is that going to hurt my chances of getting into a PhD program? Also, I didn't tell you, after all that work, I ended up not being published in my master's anyway. So all of that, so it was also the mental fatigue of having put in so much work and not getting an output out of it. Anyway, so that was the worry at that time. And then I don't know how I managed to convince the people at Cornell to take me, but they did. And I had a great time at Cornell because I learned so much. I learned so much science, but I also was among a bunch of nerds that I didn't feel like the outlier of being a nerd. And it was okay to be so obsessed over something that people usually don't think about, which is basically what a lot of nerds do in whatever research that we pursue. So that was fun. And then I got to meet fantastic people. It was my first time coming to the US, so I was really scared. I won't go into the details of this, but the first time I was subject to a fire drill, I freaked out. I got worried. I was sure I was going to be arrested because I'd set off the fire alarm somehow, or that I'd have to pay a huge penalty. So coming to the US had all of those challenges because I was like, I don't know how society here works, right? Day-to-day simple things like a fire drill was new to me. And so there were the everyday struggles of how am I going to succeed and not burn and crash and burn, right? And then as I started becoming comfortable with life in the US, then there was the question of, am I going to be good enough to be a faculty? Because one of the traits that Trevor and I share is I'm really excited about teaching. I mean, when you see somebody get as excited as I am about a topic, or when I see somebody understand something and you can see the light bulb go off, that just gives me joy like nothing else gives me joy. And so I want to be a faculty also, but then am I good enough? Because the path to becoming a faculty is really hard. And so that's a challenge that I carry till today. I was telling my boss, my PI today, recently, that I obsess. I look at the profiles of everybody that's in a similar career stage, and I'm like, where am I? Am I competitive enough? Am I making enough progress in research? Am I teaching enough? Am I publishing enough? So it's this constant struggle. And what I realized is that that's going to be a part of my life. No matter what stage of life I'm in, I'm going to constantly struggle with understanding if I'm good enough to be in that part of, and I'm starting making peace with that so that that doesn't cause me anxiety, but I can use that and channel that energy to say, okay, what is a rational way for me to think about this? Can I write down what I'm good at? Can I write down what I'm not good at? Can I find ways to support what I'm not good at? Can I find ways to build on what I'm good at and sort of take the next step forward, knowing that the world is not going to end if I don't move forward. It's okay. Things will work out and it'll work out in its due time. And so that's sort of been the struggle that continues to today and how I'm dealing with that struggle.
Arvind, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness behind that. I think coming from somebody who is faculty, that sort of imposter syndrome, I don't think it ever ends. For anyone who is introspective and thoughtful and wants to do well at what they do, I think that will stick with us for every day, for all eternity. Not to dash your hopes and dreams that it will improve. But on the flip side of that, what has been a real highlight of your work in science, or something that you're always going to look back on and say, oh, that was great?
Let me tell you this one story, and this focuses on undergraduate students that I work with. And so, as a graduate student at Cornell, I had the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of undergraduate students and to in some way contribute to their progress. Also, I don't mean to diminish the fact that they contributed to my progress because they did lab work that then made its way to in the form of experiments that then made their way to progressing my thesis and featured in my thesis. Having said that, this is one undergraduate student who's a chemical engineer, so he had never worked with bacteria before. And one of the things that you realize when you begin to grow bacteria in the lab is bacteria is everywhere. It's very easy to grow random contaminating bacteria, and it takes a lot of thought to make sure that what you're growing is only the bacteria that you want to grow. And people generally call this as sterile aseptic techniques of culturing bacteria. And so one of the things that I did early when I started working with undergrads who don't have experience working with bacteria is I try to emphasize this and try to make people very cautious of make sure you're not touching anything, make sure what you're using on media that you're going to grow bacteria is not touching anything. And part of this is, okay, if it does, how do you sterilize it? And so we have these beads that we use to spread bacteria on plates. And once you spread bacteria on plates, you toss these beads into a bottle that has ethanol, because ethanol can kill bacteria and so sterilizes these beads. This undergraduate student was so thoughtful, he would always ask me, oh, Arvind, how do you sterilize this? Or how do you sterilize that? And how do you be careful with different reagents that we're using? And so his question to me was, oh, Arvind, how do you sterilize ethanol? Which you might realize ethanol is the factor that sterilizes things. So you don't sterilize ethanol, which for people in research is this basic question that everybody knows, but he didn't know because he just got started, right? That was where he started. And we spoke about it and we progressed from there. And guess what? Today, he's a PhD student at a top lab at Stanford. And so that story to me is just so fulfilling because I feel like I played a small part in the trajectory of and he's generating proteins that are antibodies to fight diseases. So he's not doing small research, he's doing cutting edge, big time research. Having started off at a place where he didn't know that ethanol by nature was sterile and there was nothing you needed to do to sterilize it. To me, that is, and I know this is not the big science achievement that you may have been going for, but this is the big achievement in my journey in science is seeing, and this is one story, I have a few other stories of people that I work with, is these kind of stories of seeing people succeed that really drives me to do what I do.
I can absolutely relate to that. And I will add that my own crowning achievements in science has been sort of cheering others on, helping them get to where they need to be. And I think make sure you mention this when you interview for faculty jobs, right? That you like to help others. Now, Trevor, what has been something that you will always look back on and say, hey, this is really awesome, this scientific thing that I did, that'll always stay with me?
Yeah, when you ask that question, a very specific morning comes to mind. And so in my work and the people around me who I see in my department, my research group, tends to be, while all research is new, you stay the course on something generally that is working. Sometimes you just try something extra, almost like shooting for the moon. You just take a big leap on something new every now and again and see if you can do it. And I joined a new group. So when I started my PhD, I had to both learn my field and also build my lab. So build our tools that we use in our reactors and things like that. And that takes a long time, also because of shipping of things. So I was waiting for some new materials to arrive, and my advisor had given me, because I didn't have anything to do, just a project to think about. She said, oh, go see if you can make some nanoparticles using our technique, which would represent something that had never been done before. A really big advancement in this field, and nothing I had thought about doing. And she gave me an idea. I came up with my own idea, and I decided to try both. And when you work on the nanoscale, you usually have to use fancy machines to see what you've made, because you can't just look at them with a standard microscope. So I was on a scanning electron microscope, which I use at around 6:30 in the morning, because these are instruments the whole campus uses, and nobody is willing to wake up early to reserve them. So I can have it just about any day I want if I go early. But I remember zooming in, get my material, usually start zoomed out, and then you zoom in a little bit, you zoom in farther, and you focus, and then you zoom in some more. I started to zoom in, and the first idea that she gave me didn't work. And then I looked at the one that I had devised and planned to do, and I'm zooming in, and I'm starting to see particles. And like the rush that I felt to see this little tapestry of little dots all over the surface was incredible. And I'm like picking up my phone to think, who can I call? It's 6:30 in the morning. This is so exciting. I can't call anyone. And then I zoomed in some more and zoomed in some more to look at the individual particles. And immediately my thought was, oh no, because I had achieved nanoparticles, but how to say this? The shape of them was unequivocally vulgar, just like so suggestive of one specific inappropriate shape that I was like, I just did something amazing. There is no way I can ever present this. Like I cannot show this to anybody. And so that was a really fun day of meeting with my boss and finding ways to try to explain this shape using our own synonyms and to understand how on earth could this happen. It turns out later on that this specific shape was an error, and one that I was able to fix and nail down this synthetic protocol for nanoparticles. And so now I'm actually working on this new technology to make nanoparticles that is not hard to present. I can show the pictures and everything with no censorship. So that sticks out to me, because those moments where something works, the buzz of doing something for the first time is really, really special. And to both think I've done it and I could never tell anyone was something that made that a little bit more special of a day. And something my family will continue to tease me about as we go forward with their own nicknames for the monster I had created.
Well, and thank you for sharing that crowning achievement of your scientific career with the rest of us, albeit with no pictures, which is probably okay. Now, kind of continuing on this path of things that were hiccups along the path and successes, if you could go back and talk to you of high school or you of middle school, what would you tell yourself? Is there anything where you would say, other than like the lotto numbers or the winning horses, right? Something pertaining to your trajectory?
Yeah, there are so many things I would want to tell myself, but what comes to mind first is I would want to tell myself to celebrate the ways in which I was changing. And I can recognize that any of the moments in which I was considering doing something new, thought is, how is this going to affect the rest of my life? And that can become really, really intimidating and start to give you reasons almost the answer to that question is almost an excuse to beat on yourself and think of all the reasons why you shouldn't do something. but to recognize in the choices that you make the ways in which you might be getting something new and something you can be proud of, and think of it as an additive experience. When I talked about going into admissions and going to this toy company, so many of those moments were fraught with just fear of, am I ruining everything? And am I going to be stuck in this new place? But to celebrate that change, I think would have been something that would change my tune throughout. And looking back, I also would have liked to tell myself to tattoo somewhere on my body, be your own fiercest self-advocate. Be your own most fierce self-advocate. That's the way I want to say it. That's what the tattoo should say. But I find that a lot of people will, well, it's uncommon that somebody will just reach out to you with opportunities. It takes a really special mentor or advisor or person in your community to give you something new to try. But I've also found that almost everyone needs help, especially nowadays. Everyone is overloaded and needs help. And so if you want to try something, if you want to experience something, to be your own self-advocate and go and find someone who needs the help and say, I want to help you. And I want to get some experience along the way. I just wish I had known to keep asking for opportunities and not just waiting for them to show up for me, but try to make them happen a little more for myself.
Thank you. Arvind, what is something that you would go back and tell yourself, the Arvind of middle school, high school, college?
It's funny because even though Trevor and I grew up in different continents and had completely different upbringings and experiences, my words of wisdom to my younger self would be very similar to Trevor's, which is when I was growing up, the first thought that people kept telling me was, Arvind, if you work hard, you'll be successful, right? Just work hard, put your nose down, work hard, and you'll be successful. That's the only thing it takes to be successful, but it's not. You can work the hardest that you can and still not see success because that's not the only element of success. And then as I grew up a little bit more, people said, Arvind, if you're smart, you can be successful, right? So you just have to be really smart, work towards being really smart. That's not it. Being just really smart is not going to cut it either, because I've been surrounded by really smart people along the way, not all of who were able to be successful in the long run. The third option, which I've now realized is an important contributor, is luck. So now if I had to go back and tell myself, Arvind, there's three pieces. There's hard work. There is some level of building skills, and so you can call that smartness, intellect, but it's basically building skills to do things. And that can be building skills like writing an email, because when I came to the US, again, that's another thing. I had to learn all over again. What's the appropriate way to write an email? What's the appropriate way to address people, right? All of those are also skills. By skills, I don't mean holding a pipette or working with bacteria alone. While those are also skills. But the third aspect is luck. Let me tell you a little bit more about luck. Remember I told you I was an undergrad and none of my faculty had written letters of recommendation for serious graduate positions. I had this one faculty who gave a lecture in the college, and he was from a bigger institution, right? He was from an IIT, and IITs are these famed institutions in India that lead to students being very successful and go abroad for higher education. And so after his lecture, I reached out to him and I said, hey, can I talk to you? And I have some ideas. I'd like to run these ideas by you. And he said, sure, we can talk. And I set a time to talk to him. I put in a lot of, again, going back to the two other foundations, I put in a lot of hard work to make sure that I understood what I was going to talk about. I applied the skills that I'd learned till then to put together an idea that I wanted to talk about. And then I took this idea to this opportunity that I had with him. And here, opportunity, luck, I think that they're all similar in vein. I was lucky to have reached out to him and for him to say, okay, come talk to me. And I shared this proposal, this idea with him, which we then, with his help, turned into a proposal, which allowed me to get a summer internship. And he had written a letter of recommendation for me to get a summer internship. Now that one interaction with him has changed my trajectory, because that letter of recommendation gave me a summer internship. In that summer internship, I got a second letter of recommendation from somebody in another big institution. Now I had two letters and two big names in India that could then help me move forward. And that helped me get into a graduate program in India. Now I had a third person from the graduate program in India who was able to give me a letter. So now I had three letters. And by letters, this is sort of I don't just mean a letter, but also somebody who I could bounce ideas off of, somebody who would guide me, who had the experience of having been successful in a path to a PhD program, because they all had fantastic PhD accomplishments. And now I had three people that I could reach out to and sort of build so you can see this is sort of clawing my way forward, taking one opportunity at a time. And many times as a result now, I take opportunities that I have no idea what the relevance of that opportunity is for me in that moment. But almost always, there are exceptions, almost always, it ends up adding a layer to who I am and to my career that does become effective. And one of this is I created a podcast in grad school, and that ended up being a part of my thesis. And that's how I worked with your peers from several years ago at the Onondaga Community College to test the podcast, to see what students thought about the podcast and how it made them feel. Something I never in my wildest dream would have thought about, right? Creating a podcast, I had no experience in this, but working on that. So all of this is to say, I think there are three elements to success. None of them are more important than the other, but all of them together will come together. You just have to stick with it for it to come together. And this is put in the most effort that you're able to put in, because my level of hard work is going to be different from Trevor's level of hard work, right? There's not one level of hard work that all of us can put. So put in the best effort you can. In the process, develop skills and knowledge, because those will stand you in good foundation in the long run. And third, never turn your back on an opportunity, because you don't know what that might result in. And you might go down the path of an opportunity, and after having sufficiently tested it, you might say, you know what, that's not for me. And that's totally fine. You would have learned something in the process about what you like, what you don't like, but don't give up on opportunities, because those are what open up doors. So that's what I would tell myself from years ago. Take all the opportunities, and don't worry, things will be okay.
I like that. Things will be okay. One thing we try to help our students with is we try to connect them to internships. And I hear this theme in both of what you've said, is that you had these internships that you either, as you put it, Arvind, you clawed your way to the top, you found them, or they were offered. So would you like to say a little bit about sort of the value of internships, and why should students, what they feel like sometimes sort of wasting time, spending their summer or extra time during the semester pursuing an internship, what comes of them?
Let me tell you this with the story of an ice cream, of getting ice cream. So there are different kinds of ways people, when you go to a dessert bar, when you go get ice cream, there are different ways you can get ice cream, right? There are some people who love a flavor of ice cream, right? Maybe that's chocolate ice cream. And every time you go get ice cream, you want to get chocolate ice cream, because you know you like it, it's a good ice cream, and it gives you happiness, right? But I've always been the type who says, if you haven't tried that mango sorbet, you actually don't know if you like the mango sorbet. And you actually don't know if you like it more or less than the chocolate ice cream. And if you did try the mango sorbet and you realized, you know, I don't like the mango sorbet, that's okay. Because next time you go to an ice cream store and you have to pick between chocolate ice cream and a mango sorbet, you know you like the chocolate ice cream. So this is sort of my eye-opening exercise in working on internships, is figuring out what I like and what I don't like. And the only way, and it's easy to think I know for sure what I like based on the limited experience that I have, because that's all I know. I don't know anything else. But once you start broadening that experience, there's an opportunity to find avenues that I like more or that I like less, and to make reasoned choices going forward. And in that process, I might find that one gem that really calls out to me, because otherwise I would have missed it. So when you go to an ice cream store, get different flavors until you know what flavor you like the most.
That's the best advice of the day. Trevor, can you share a little bit about internships? And I know you already said, you know, take the opportunities when they arise.
Sure, yeah. Internships have never made me so hungry as this conversation. Well, I'm afraid my answer will be a little drier. I think the other values to them are often you get paid, especially when you're in school. It's different to get paid than to pay for an experience. And it's the tools that you learn or get experience with in a company are really easily translated as value to somewhere else you would apply, even if it's for a short period of time. So that's all I would say. The icing on top of the ice cream cake is the things that help you with your next step. It's like I said, when these moments where you want to try something and you're worried it's going to be the rest of your life, the internship is inherently not that. It's inherently a kind of period that has an end, so that you know you can try something and keep going. So in my case, I worked at a Lego-based education mentorship company. So this was from the person who had created Lego Mindstorms. We would have companies come to us and say, we want an outreach program based on our technology. How can we teach that using Legos? And I would design the project that they could go and teach. I worked at a tissue engineering company making replacement ACL scaffolds out of woven spider silk. So I was working in a clean room with something that was going through FDA approval. And I worked at a hydrogen fuel cell company that was trying to make car engines out of, with hydrogen as the fuel source, making their test stands and testing them for their efficiency. And what a roundup. I think in so many ways, those experiences have helped me, of course, in my jobs and but also in my life. I can fix things around my home that I learned on that job. And I was very valuable to my advisor here as someone who needed to build a reactor that would shuttle vapors around, having done that with hydrogen fuel cells. So yeah, they were a really nice grab bag of skills that I got to leave with.
There's a question from the audience, and it's, was the job at the toy company the best job ever? Oh, I think you're muted.
I am muted. No, it wasn't, but it was really fun in some ways. A really great opportunity and ultimately pretty inspiring. It was the hardest probably I've ever had to work, to join a company and help them launch a product. A physical product was a monumental task. And we had done it through Kickstarter. If you're familiar with Kickstarter, was how we got our initial rounds of funding. And so to have a whole group of people already waiting and expecting the product as soon as possible, it was very deliberate that I ended up at this toy company. Like I said, I graduated and I did the admissions thing, and I knew I loved teaching, but in admissions I was missing science. I would actually say I miss my calculator. I miss playing with numbers, and so I looked for something that was engineering and more. And I knew a startup company, people had always told me, in a startup you have to do a little bit of everything. And so a toy company where I could work a little on the science of the toy. It was a tech toy, kind of like robotics, but also do some marketing and talking about it, evangelizing of this new exciting thing seemed pretty perfect. So I actually ended up, this was the moment where I realized this kind of being your own self-advocate and asking for what you wanted. I got so sick of applying for jobs by sending out emails, cover letters, and resumes and never getting a response. It is so soul crushing to just put yourself out there and get nothing back so many times that I ultimately just got in my car and I drove down there with a tie on, and I walked into the company, and I found a woman walking out of the bathroom, and I said, "I'm so sorry if this is a bad time. I really hope showing up in person hasn't gone out of style, but I would love to work here, and I think I would be good here. Is there anyone I could talk to about that?" And the whole time it felt like I was sitting outside of my body looking at myself going, what are you doing? What are you doing right now? But I sat down with their hiring person. We had a great chat, and 2 interviews later I was working there, and that was a moment where it worked out in a way that was really nice. But the job was a lot of work. It was a lot of everything. I was doing everything from standing in malls trying to sell our prototypes to social media to camps for kids to see how they interact with our toys and how to make them better. So.
Wow, that's the best job interview story I've heard. It's one of those, this could end with me having a job or a restraining order. So,
that's right. Yeah.
I'm glad it ended up in a job. The other question from the audience is for Arvind, and someone would like to know what you do with COVID fecal matter. What are you studying? What are you trying to sort out? And what does it look like? Do you get vials filled with poop? Do they come from the lab?
Yes, we do. We get, so in my lab space, we literally have freezers full of tubes of poop. And they're all labeled as coming from different people. We've pooped from a wide range of studies that we're using to ask several questions. But I'll tell you about the COVID study briefly, but I'm happy to talk about other ways we're using poop to understand human health. So one of the weird things we realized very early in the pandemic, and this is going all the way back to March, is everybody, so when you go get a COVID test, what do? They stick a swab up your nose. It's either testing the nose or a little bit deeper, what's called the nasopharyngeal or the oropharyngeal tracts, and they pull the swab out. They do a PCR test, which everybody now knows about, and they are like, oh, is there viral RNA or not, right? And hopefully there's no viral RNA and we're safe. But if there's an instance of viral RNA, we say, okay, this person is infected. But because we're so obsessed about poop, we watched a parallel story evolve, which is people found that this RNA was in poop. When patients were infected with COVID, their poop had COVID RNA, SARS-CoV-2 RNA. Again, I want to say nobody has identified infectious particle from poop, which means that there are some diseases, a classic example being norovirus that people on cruise ships get. I know cruise ships have gotten a really bad rap, but norovirus diseases spread in cruise ships, and those can spread from one person's poop to another person through their food because things are not that clean on a cruise ship, apparently. But that doesn't happen with COVID, right? So you cannot catch an infection from somebody else's poop, but you do find RNA in people's poop. And here's the mind-blowing thing. So we work with a clinical trial. One of the advantages of being at Stanford is there's so much resources. So there are actually active clinical trials that are being run today as we speak to find cures for COVID. So we piggybacked on one of these clinical trials that was testing an injection to see if the injection could help people recover quickly. The injection didn't work. So something that's interesting that you learn is most clinical trials actually fail because it's really hard to come up with a drug. But in the process of working with this clinical trial, we collected poop from 120 patients over 10 months. So we collected poop from day 0, the day they started off on the clinical trial, out to 10 months in the clinical trial. And that resulted in about 700 poop samples. So we took each of these 700 poop samples, took a small bit of it, spun it down in a centrifuge, took the liquid part of the poop. I know this is all a little gross. It was gross the first time I did it, but then I kind of got used to it. So you take the liquid part of this poop, which is where the RNA is, and you isolate the RNA and you count the RNA. You can do this using RT-PCR. You can also do it using another technique called ddPCR. And so now we have these profiles of how much RNA is in these patients over a 10-month period. I'll tell you, because we're talking today, the punchline of this study that's not out yet, so don't tell anybody, but so you know, we see patients have RNA in their stool out to 4 months after the infection. So all of these patients would have gotten a swab test, and within 14 days, most patients have a negative swab test, right? Some patients up to 28 days, but we see that in stool out to 4 months, and we genuinely don't understand why that is. We have some hypotheses, one of which is we think that the gut is probably getting infected. So not only your lungs, but also your intestines, your GI tract is being infected. There are many other evidences that might be the case. There's inflammation in the gut. There's other things in the gut that suggest that there's an infection, but we don't really know that. So that's what I do with poop and COVID patients.
Thank you for elaborating. And yeah, I'm guessing after running 700 poop samples, it's all the same at the end of the day. So we're getting to the close of our time, and I just wanted to check to see if any of you had any parting words for our students, any sort of nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to pass along. Arvind, do you have anything that you'd like to leave our students with? If not, I'll put Trevor on the spot.
Yeah, I want to say that I have confidence in every one of you and your ability to find a passion that calls out to you and to pursue that passion. And And I want to say that, remember, I spoke about this faculty that I was able to reach out to for that first letter of recommendation as an undergrad. If there's any way I can be that person for you and I can be a resource to you, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And if I can't, if I'm not, that's fine. Reach out to somebody who can be that person. If you knock on 10 doors, some of them will open. But you gotta be the one to knock on those doors. They're not just gonna open for you. So feel free to reach out to me if I can be of any resource to you. Also, if I can help you find other resources that'll support you in your passion, I'm happy to be a source of help and assistance.
Yeah, and if anyone is interested in reaching out to either Arvind or Trevor, please get in touch with me and I'll make that connection. Trevor, do you have any parting words for our students?
I'm going to say Arvind and I, again, are pretty much in lockstep, but I'll phrase it a different way and that just say that I've come to think of learning as equal parts the people you connect yourself to as what you're learning in the lab or the classroom. And I just found that my ability to succeed and find opportunities always comes from the people I talk to. So I'm emboldened by the fact that you would come here today and listen to some new stories. I would also be emboldened to know that you would be willing to reach out to Arvind or I to make a new connection, to ask some questions, but to just keep doing that, to remember the human part of what you're up to and how much that can give back to you. Arvind, I had the pleasure of working with Arvind to start a diversity and inclusion program in our department at Cornell, and our work on that is certainly something that has bonded us, and I know that I'll be able to use Arvind as a resource and a friend going forward. And the people pay off just as much as the research does, so don't forget them.
Well, thank you very much for those words. Certainly, I can see that theme in my own scientific journey. It's the people that you remember. And as I said, if anyone is interested in chatting more with Arvind or Trevor or has any specific questions or wants to go to Stanford for an internship and wants to use Arvind as an anchor, please get in touch with me and I'll be happy to pass that message on. That brings us to the close of our seminar for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.